year ago, a movie called Persuasion came out on Netflix. It was widely regarded as awful, and I did not watch it at the time because I have standards. But then recently I was rereading Persuasion and I thought, let's give this movie a try. It wasn't good. However, it wasn't bad for the reasons that I thought it was going to be. All the reason that people were upset about the trailer and the clips that we had seen of the film was the fact that they used sort of this modern language and this slang. And I expected there to be a whole lot more of this anachronistic language that I was gonna find really, really annoying. But the thing is, it didn't show up that often. Mind you, when it did show up, I found it very annoying and not funny at all. But I could find other things about this film that I hated more than that. There are issues of tone and character and just basic storyline changes, and all the inaccurate historical language just didn't seem as much of an issue. However, I do think that this opens an interesting conversation about historical accuracy when it comes to book-to-film adaptations and book-to-TV show adaptations. My first video I ever made on this channel, I had a small section of it where I talked about historical accuracy and when it mattered and why I thought it mattered. And I've been wanting to make a more in-length video about that concept. And so today that's what we're gonna do. But I also want to complain a little bit about Persuasion, so let's do that. So first off, I want to talk a little bit about the biggest issue with the anachronistic language in Persuasion, and that is the slang that they used. Now, there's no harm in necessarily using modern language, especially if you're trying to get people interested in a classic novel and you feel that the sort of older version of the way people spoke seems too formal and challenging for some people, because that definitely does put some people off. But the problem is that slang changes so fast, especially nowadays with the internet and social media. What is cool a month ago is no longer cool now. And so when you write a script for a film, and if you're including slang that is popular when you're writing the script, it's gonna be considered cringy when the film is finished being made, let alone when it finally comes out or a year later when someone's watching it for the first time. It just makes it seem really, really dated and almost like that meme of like the "how you do, fellow kids?" Like, is this what the cool kids say? I'm not sure. The other problem with this anachronistic language is that it completely changes the tone of Persuasion. But modernizations, I don't have an issue with. Modern stories can be dramas, they can be comedies, they can be anything. However, if you're having a historical fiction that is taking place in the past and you're including futuristic language, that in itself is going to be comedic because it feels so out of place, it feels uncomfortable, and that creates comedy. So you can't really put something in the past, give it this futuristic language, and expect it to still be a drama. And that's the biggest problem with Persuasion on Netflix, is that Persuasion is widely regarded as Jane Austen's saddest and most serious and least funny novels. It's this really sad tale about this woman who basically for the entire novel is just working up herself emotionally to go to these events where her older suitor is gonna be, and then not talking to him for the whole time. Anne is considered this very special character within her literature because Anne is so different. She's the most mature out of all of Jane Austen's heroines, and she's quiet, she's mature, she's reserved, she is genuinely kind and cares for the people in her family even though they don't appreciate her. And I think the biggest change is that this film took Anne from that and made her very immature. They made her speak without thinking. They made her sort of silly and funny and just generally not the same person that she was in the original novel. And I think that that is where we get the biggest issue with the modernization, and it's a trap that I see a lot of modernizations fall into, which I will be getting into a little bit more when we start talking more about historical accuracy as a whole. The other big issue I have with this film, and I would say this has more to do with sort of a modernization of filming techniques and styles, and that's the fourth wall breaks. Anne does a lot of fourth wall breaks similar into the style of Fleabag, except if Fleabag was not executed very well, where Fleabag is interesting because the fourth wall breaks sort of give us the inner thoughts of the main character, and they sort of add something to the story. The fourth wall breaks in Persuasion are not like that at all. What they do instead is that they provide exposition that could have been gleaned by the audience just by simply watching. This film has a big issue with the show don't tell rule, where they want to tell us everything instead of letting us as an audience figure it out on our own and trusting that we're intelligent enough to view it and understand it. Some of the other big issues with this is just general changes to the storyline that completely change the themes of the novel. Persuasion is a novel about persuasion. I probably could have worded that more interestingly. But it's also about, you know, class structure and social hierarchy. Anne is very opposed to this class structure and social hierarchy, which is something that we see in the book with her friendship to Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith is her friend who is a widow, doesn't have any money, and her family is always asking her, Anne, why do you go and visit this person if they're not doing anything for you to raise your social standing? And she says, she's my friend, and I'm gonna still visit her. And it turns out that this friendship leads to her finding out about Mr. Elliot's schemes. And so it ends up being beneficial for her in sort of a strange way, and then she's able to sort of help her friend once she and Wentworth get together. Mrs. Smith is completely removed from the film, and Mr. Elliot tells Anne what his plan is pretty much immediately after meeting her. It's strange. The removal of this pivotal character that is so integral to the theme of this story really shows me where the priorities lie for the creative team and the director and the writer behind this film. It makes me really sad because this could have been really relevant. That's one of the great things about Austen's work, is that even though a lot of the specific things that happen aren't really relevant to how we live our lives today, a lot of the themes and the general ideas are still very relevant in present day. And so that's something that I find really heartbreaking, is the idea that they want to change that. And it just shows me that they really didn't care. Anne still talks about, oh, why do we need to go visit these people if they're not even really related to us? Why does social status matter? But again, that is using that telling and not showing problem, where they're having Anne say what she believes rather than show us her actions of how she's actually putting that into effect. Okay, so with that little rant out of the way, I want to talk specifically about historical accuracy and when it's important, why it's important, all that fun stuff. First off, I want to make a little bit of a disclaimer. A lot of times when people claim historical accuracy, it's to try and say that a film shouldn't be diverse. Trying to say things like, oh, black people didn't exist then, gay people didn't exist then in this scenario, and I have to tell you, they did. And if you think that that's true, you clearly have not educated yourself enough on that context. I'm talking about historical accuracy in the form of language, in the form of the music and the thematic techniques used for filming. And I'm also specifically going to be talking about period pieces. I'm not going to be talking about modern adaptations. Full modern adaptations, I do not care about, because that is a completely different thing. And there are actually a few instances of these period pieces with anachronistic language and music and editing and thematic styles that I actually really like. For example, Dickinson. It takes place in Emily Dickinson's era. It's about her life, but it also incorporates themes and styles of her poem in sort of this surrealist mixture with her real life. And it is very modern. All the music is very modern, and a lot of the things that they say and do are quite modern, and it's really funny and it's really enjoyable. Another one is The Irregulars, which is the first video I ever made on this channel, and I actually really enjoyed sort of the modern editing and music and filming styles that they used. I thought it was a really cool way to blend into the themes, which we'll talk about more. What makes things like Dickinson and The Irregulars okay, but Persuasion not? What is the delineation there that makes them different? I have found 3 reasons why I think that historical accuracy is important and how to correctly honor it. Number 1, what is the source material? So for Dickinson, that is not based on a specific work. It's based on Emily Dickinson's life. It is based on speculation about her life. It is based on her poems. And so because we're focusing on her life, and because we're focusing on this sort of creative telling of her life, a lot of artistic liberties can be taken. And that basically means that we can have this surrealist artistic style, incorporating things from her poems and incorporating strange characters like a personification of death that she's having this weird romance with. With the Irregulars, it's very loosely based on a small group of side characters from Sherlock Holmes. And so because it's not based on an actual Sherlock Holmes story, and because it's not strongly tied to a lot of information, we can have a little bit more freedom to do what we want with these characters. We can have a little bit more creative liberties because it is an original story. But when a source is really thought out and there's a lot of information and a lot of lore and a lot of backstory to it, it becomes a lot more problematic when you're making these artistic choices and you're changing things, because people are so devoted to the story. The reason they are coming is because they want to see a visualization of something that they really, really love. So a big problem is that as you're making these changes, you have to be careful not to go too far from the source material. And that is a big problem that Persuasion takes. There's a big shift in just general tone and general storyline. Now, if this is a historical piece that is sci-fi or fantasy, we're going to accept some changes. We're going to accept some deviation as readers because we're expecting it. You know, it's a completely brand new world, and that's totally cool. But when we're talking about a pure historical novel, we're expecting a certain level of realism to come with it and a certain level of accuracy to the time period that it's set in. Persuasion is a pure historical. We expect it to be accurate. The Irregulars is sort of a fantasy style. Also, I mentioned the humor of the anachronistic lines. That's the big problem. We're having a big shift in genre. And with the other stories, again, they were original stories, so we're not having these shifts. I actually think that this style of film could have worked really well without the slang, of course, but if we had a sort of a historical version of Pride and Prejudice or Emma, and we had them speaking in sort of modern language, I think that could really work, because Pride and Prejudice is quite funny, and Emma is quite funny as well. Heck, you could even do a version of Northanger Abbey that just really lean into the comedy, because it is a satire. And you could really have a lot of fun with that, but Persuasion is just not the right source material for this style. It's the same thing with the fourth wall breaks, right? The fourth wall breaks add a level of humor to it. You're not really going to find that in a serious drama. And again, I think the fourth wall breaks could potentially work for something like Emma or like Pride and Prejudice, but if they were just done a little bit better. I could honestly make an entire video about how to do good fourth wall breaks, but I doubt any of you would be interested in that, so we're gonna move on. The second big thing for how to have good historical accuracy and what matters in historical accuracy is setting and character. So historical context is always really important in these sort of historical novels, where things like Jane Austen, or, you know, even something that's not that old, maybe something that's just like from the 50s. We'll use Narnia, for example. That's World War II. So historical context is important. It's going to shape the way that the author wrote the novel. It's also going to shape the themes that they put into their novel. It's what they're thinking about at the time. The people who wrote them did not live in our society. They did not have sort of the same themes and backgrounds that we currently are looking at. So when we're modernizing things, sometimes we modernize them because they simply just don't really work anymore. They're not really relatable anymore. So a lot of times the reason these pure modernizations don't work is because so much of the story is tied to things that just don't happen anymore. I'll give you an example again. Clueless. Love Clueless. There is one scene in Clueless I think is so strange, which is when she takes a picture of Sky, I think her name is, and the guy who she wants to date, her friend, keeps the picture, and she says, oh, he's into her, but really it's just because she took the picture and he wanted to keep her photography work. That That doesn't make any sense. But in Emma, it's different because Emma paints a portrait of her friend, and so he's keeping it because it's Emma's handiwork, it's her artwork. So again, that modernization doesn't really work in that instance because it's so tied to the historical context. I would say that if they really wanted to do a modernized version of Persuasion, go all in. Like, set it in the present day, make it more relatable to people who feel that they can't relate to Jane Austen, and really, if they had made even more changes and maybe just said, oh, this is inspired by Persuasion, rather than saying this is Persuasion, it would have a very different reaction. Another big issue is characterization and the idea of how to modernize these characters. And a big trap that I see people fall into, and it annoys me to no end, is that modernizing a heroine means making them rude and sarcastic. Because apparently a modern woman is strong and sarcastic and quippy. That is not at all a pure case. There are definitely strong women out there who are sarcastic and quippy and strong, but there are also strong women out there who are kind and quiet and mature and reserved. And that doesn't make them any less modern, it doesn't make them any less feminist. And I think that's a big issue that we're seeing with these modernizations and these live action adaptations of Disney princess movies. I mean, look at how angry people have been at Rachel Zegler for the changes that have been made to Snow White and the clear fact that the people making that film don't really respect the original story at all. Modernization is a lot less jarring if a character still looks like themselves. Again, if Anne was not this quippy character, if she, spoke with sort of modern language, but she was still mature and she was still quiet and she was still kind, that would work. But she isn't. She speaks without thinking, she's quite jealous and immature, and instead of being kind and genuinely helping her family and people because she's a kind person, she does it with rolled eyes and sort of looks towards the camera and sort of this annoyance that makes it seem like she's doing it not because she's a kind person, but because she feels that she has to. It completely changes this characterization, and it just makes her mean and rude. And frankly, everyone in this entire film is mean and rude. I didn't find really anyone in this movie likable except for Louisa. And I will be honest, I did kind of like Wentworth. The guy who played him made him very awkward and like socially anxious, and I did enjoy that. I found that quite enjoyable, but everyone else was annoying, and that made it really hard to root for Anne and Wentworth in the end. And the third big thing that needs to be respected when doing historical changes is the themes of the novel. I've already talked a little bit about how historical context really influences the themes of a novel. Personal context is also really important as well. So a little bit of background on Persuasion. It is thought that Jane Austen got inspiration for Persuasion from what was happening to her niece, where her niece was being persuaded to marry this suitor of hers, but Jane did not think that this was a good match for her. She did not think it was a good decision for her to go and marry this man. Persuasion is about the dangers of persuasion and this idea of social hierarchy and the importance of it within the marriage area. Persuasion 2022 on Netflix falls into another trap that I really, really hate, which is that every single historical period piece thinks that they are revolutionary to say, oh, women should be able to marry for love. This may be a hot take. I find it so annoying when a period piece bogs down their meaning and their message to simply women matter, women have opinions, women should be able to marry for love, and act like it's the most revolutionary thing they've ever said. Like, we know. This is not news to us. We have so many films telling us this. It's not interesting anymore. And I think that's the biggest thing that annoys me with Persuasion is that, like I said, there are so many great themes in Persuasion, so many that are still currently relevant. To throw all of those away in favor of saying, oh, you should be able to marry for whatever reason you want. It's insulting, I think, both to readers and watchers, but also to the author, because When an author puts so much work into putting this beautiful message and you just throw all those away to put something else in, just say you don't respect the source material. And here's the thing, there are ways to use these historical inaccuracies to push the themes that you are sort of looking to put in. I'll use the Irregulars as an example again. In the Irregulars, they have a lot of jarring editing and they have very modern music, and the reason that this works is because the Irregulars has this very strong theme of the idea of youth being the future, and the idea that young people need to sort of step up and take charge and start working towards getting a better future. And so using sort of this modern music, this upbeat and lively editing style, that lends itself to a very young style, which sort of emulates the theme that we're going for. If you've ever heard the idea of the medium is the message, it's just the idea that the story isn't the only thing that tells us what we're trying to hear. Sometimes it's also the sort of technical side of things as well. And I think that Irregulars does that really, really well. And that's something that Persuasion could have done, but didn't. I did not like Persuasion, but not for the reasons that I thought. I thought I was going to be abhorred by the amount of historical inaccuracy, but that was honestly a very small part of it. The bigger thing that I found issues with was the changes to the themes, the characterizations, and the general storyline. And then the way that this was done, it just showed a clear lack of respect for the original story, a clear lack of understanding of the original themes, and really held no interest in the integrity of the source material. It's the idea that modern means the same thing for all people, and that if a character is going to be modern, they have to be a certain way. When in reality, people are just as different and diverse now as they were back then. And so having different personalities and having some people be kind and quiet doesn't make it any less modern. I do not think that anachronistic films and shows are bad. I do not think that including modern things in sort of a historical setting is inherently a bad thing. I think it can be done well, but I think that it can only be done well if they're done in a certain time in a place. If it works for the story that you're trying to tell, if it works for the genre and the themes and the thematic style, all ties itself together into a nice little bow, then yeah. Anachronistic language can be fun, it can be funny, but there's a time and place for it. And this was not it. I'm really hoping that if these people decide to do more works like this, because I did hear that they had their sights set on Pride and Prejudice, that they try and improve what they've already done, because as I said, I think this could work really well for Pride and Prejudice, but we'll see. But that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up. And let me know in the comments, did any of you watch Persuasion and not like it as well? Or did you like it? And if so, let me know. Maybe you can convince me otherwise. And also, what Jane Austen novel would you think would work in this sort of style with sort of a modern language? Or maybe you don't think any of them would, I don't know. But let me know in the comments. I'd love to have a conversation with all of you. But that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see all of you lovely people in the next video. Bye!